Honey. It's one of the greatest gifts to man. With millions of wildflowers in every bottle, the nourishing power of honey is still yet to be fully discovered. Be Nourished Healing Products combines healing ingredients from around the planet to the purest honey from the island of Maui to bring magic to your taste buds. The best honey from the most beautiful place to nourish your body, mind, and soul. From our hearts to yours, be nourished.
Welcome to the Loyal Opposition Podcast. I'm Berney Flowers, one of Uncle Sam's wayward children. I believe that our country's best days are still in front of us, but if those best days are to come, we need to change the direction of the country now before it's too late. I intend to talk about important topics every week in hopes of helping to improve our country and our way of life. Please like, share, and subscribe. Let's get started. Our guest for this episode, episode 29, is Lieutenant Colonel Scott Willens, U.S. Army, retired. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Scott Willens received his bachelor's degree in animal science from Rutgers University in 1992. He received a doctorate in veterinary medicine from the University of Minnesota in 1996. He earned a Ph.D. in Comparative Biomedical Sciences, Pharmacology, from North Carolina State University in 2005. Immediately after the events of September 11, 2001, Dr. Willens joined the United States Army Veterinary Corps and retired as a lieutenant colonel after 20 years of service. He deployed to Iraq in 2007 on an embedded provincial reconstruction team to assist agricultural communities in Babil Province and veterinarians at the Baghdad Zoo. Dr. Willens' expertise includes avian, exotic, aquatic animal medicine and surgery, pharmacology, toxicology, preventive medicine, and public health. Dr. Willens holds a third-degree black belt in taekwondo, and he sings lead vocals for the 80s rock cover band Weird Science. Scott Willens is a patriot. Scott happens to be of Jewish descent. Scott is also my trusted friend. Scott, how you doing, brother?
Morning, Berney. Great to see you.
It's always good to see you, pal. As a military officer, I have some questions for you. We might say ate some of the same dirt years ago over in the Middle East, and I know you have a background that's unique that our audience will appreciate. So with that said, can you give us your version of what is happening in Israel and Gaza?
Really can't talk about the current events without talking a little bit about the history of what goes on there. And some would like to think that everything was very amicable and cordial before the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, but it was not. Prior to that, Jews were attacked in pogroms, very similar to what happened in Russia and Eastern Europe by their Arab neighbors. And during World War II, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, the spiritual and political leader for the Palestinians, set up death squads and battalions that went to Hungary to wipe out the Hungarian Jews for Hitler, who was actually offered to ransom those Jews to the British Mandate that was called Palestine. And rather than doing that, they didn't want the Jews living there with them and offered to do dirty work for Hitler and wiped out most of the Hungarian Jews. And then once the state was established in 1948, the Palestinians were not driven out. They chose to leave because they were called by Israel's neighbors in mass exodus to join them in attacks on Israel. And there were 4 wars waged over the next couple of decades, all of which the Arab neighbors lost. And as you know, when you instigate a war and you lose it, you don't get to dictate the terms of the peace. And so Israel took land in concession for those wars: the Sinai, Golan Heights, Gaza, and West Bank. And for a simple piece of paper, a gentleman's agreement during the Carter administration, Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, which was more than half of its landmass at the time. And when we're speaking of proportionality here, most of Jordan is Palestinian, and that was more than half of the landmass of the British Mandate of Palestine. So Israel gave it back, and then also gave back Gaza and West Bank for Palestinian autonomy, and they've used that for the past few decades as a staging ground for rockets and other terrorist attacks against civilians in Israel. With Jews, as a Jewish state, anyone can live there: Christians, Muslims, anybody, and they can serve not only in the military, but in the Knesset, in the parliament, with representation, as well as have full citizenship. Not so the case for any non-Muslims living in the Muslim world, in any of those countries, where you have at best dhimmi status and you're oppressed with higher taxes and second-class status, if not even non-citizenship. So those freedoms are in Israel for anyone, whether they're Jewish or not. And Israel is the only country, probably other than us and save a few others, that actually takes the time to minimize civilian casualties when it comes to retaliation. They knock on what's called knocking on the roof with dud munitions to let civilians know that they're going to hit that building. They've issued warnings for northern Gaza to leave that area because they're going to be coming in and they want to minimize those casualties. Whereas Hamas is trying to maximize civilian casualties, even on their own side. The misinformation campaign, sometimes we call it Pallywood, like Ballywood, or it's fake videos we've seen in the past where someone's lying on a gurney bleeding out and then they forget to turn off the video and the guy jumps off the gurney. It's staged. The rocket that hit was a Islamic Jihad rocket with the satellite imagery. We know this, and yet they're still putting forward that Israel attacked the hospital, and it didn't even hit the hospital. They don't care about it. The Arab neighbors don't care about anyone in Gaza or Palestinians in general, because they won't let them in the country. Part of it is understandable for the same reason we don't want our borders flooded, although that's what's happened under the Biden administration, because we don't know who's coming through. We don't know their level of indoctrination and what kind of hate they've been brought up to believe. Golda Meir stated, previous prime minister of Israel, that the war with the Arabs will end when they learn to love their children more than they hate ours. And I know from my personal experience when I went to Iraq, when we say never again about the Holocaust, it doesn't just mean whether it's Jews, it's anybody. So when I saw, aside from the fact that we found tons of chemical weapons in Iraq, so this myth of no WMDs or the Bush lied, they died, is totally ridiculous. I was in the Chem Bio Defense program for 20 years, and we know what we found. Senator Santorum declassified it, and the people of Pennsylvania rewarded his honesty by voting him out of office because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that truth. But even the chem weapons aside, many of which went into Syria under the guise of a dam break, and then we were dealing with that during the past decade, and Assad using it on his own people. When you have genocide being committed against the Kurds and the Marsh Arabs being choked out of their land by the canals being shut off, you can't sit by and say, well, it's not my people, so I'm I'm going to let it happen again. And that's part of why I volunteered in 2007, because I was not going to be that hypocrite. And I had no misgivings that if I wasn't going to let everyone there know that I was Jewish, because that wouldn't have been wise. But I wanted those kids to have a different future with my son and maybe not want to hate or kill him than they otherwise would have had. So anyone who talks about Islamophobia or racism or things like that, I didn't see them in the literal or figurative foxhole next to me in Iraq. They were pontificating from Starbucks and wine bars, talking about endless wars with an enemy that's been waging this since the 7th century. They say, the Taliban said, the West has the watches, we have the time. And I've been asked, how do you measure victory? Because that's a word that the left doesn't really like using, victory. They like putting forward perpetual losers and talking about victimhood and things like that. Victory for me in an endless war is measured incrementally as every day that my children are safe. And even if we're running on a treadmill, seemingly just to stand still so that we don't go flying back into the wall behind us or in a heap on the floor, we have to do it because this enemy sees our war weariness as a weakness and exploits it to full effect for the weakness that it is. They understand strength and being resoundingly beaten, and that's really all that they understand. So you're going back to your question again about what's going on in Israel. It's really a matter of wanting dead Jews, and in this country, it's the same. And we've had infiltration of our academic institutions by radical Islamists for decades, and the far left. And don't get me wrong, the far left and the far right, we like to think of political spectrum as this linear continuum, and it's not. It's a circle where the same idiots meet up on the other side. And either way, it spells bad news for Jews. And either way, it's dealing with gun grabs and things like that. But the far left has perpetuated these myths, and we're dealing with a rise in anti-Semitism here. Israel needs to do what it needs to do, unfettered. No one told us to be restrained after 9/11 and not go after the people that perpetuated that attack against us and took out American lives. And this is tenfold per capita of 9/11 for Israel. But you're talking about the death and suffering of Holocaust survivors, their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-grandchildren who came out of the other side of the Holocaust and the death camps only to have this befall them. Israel needs to do what it needs to do to protect its most precious resource, which is its children. And any parent that doesn't have their child on one side of the scale and even all the other children of the adversary on the other side, and they don't put their thumb down on the scale of the side of their children, is either lying to themselves and everyone else, or they're not worth spit as a parent. That really is what it boils down to, is the protection of your kids. So I hope that Israel is victorious there. I know one of your, you may ask later about some things about Israel, and I'll talk about what my intentions are.
Or you're going to have your turn. No doubt about it.
Did I answer your question?
You did, and I appreciate that. So, if you led the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what advice would you give to the president to fix this problem and to save lives on both sides of the conflict?
In part, I think I alluded to the fact that we need to let Israel do unfettered what it needs to protect its people. On the other hand, we also need to squelch at home and overseas the misinformation, to stop the moral equivalence or moral skewing arguments in favor of those who wield death and destruction versus those who believe in construction and education and treasuring of their children and life in general. And I'm glad that we sent a couple of aircraft carriers over there, but we really need to be doing more. I mean, I would never say Israel aside, but for the moment, let's talk about 30 dead Americans and how many are unknown that are captive and hostage right now in Gaza. We should be. I find myself daily struggling between reciting mourner's Kaddish for those who have gone and chanting, "Let the bodies hit the floor," like I did after 9/11. We need to unleash holy hell. If there's parking lots over there in the Middle East, if there's a nice little tactical nuclear site in Tehran by Israel or whoever, to show that we mean business, because make no mistake, if Israel winds up in a checkmate situation, they're going to use those nuclear weapons. And if we want to avoid that and the environmental catastrophes entailed, then we need to take part now. There's no sitting on the sidelines. There's no peace in our time. Neville Chamberlain completely failed philosophy that we know from last century. Even the false security that we had when Clinton lowered our guard and what led to 9/11. And honestly, if our own intelligence agencies weren't so preoccupied with going after Donald Trump, and if Israel's left wasn't comparably so preoccupied with trying to stick it to Benjamin Netanyahu, who's also a comparable outspoken patriot and sheepdog, then they wouldn't have let their guard down to who the real enemy is. And so we got to get the walls back up and our guard back up, and the intelligence agencies working together and working towards taking down the adversary, and not those who are protecting us. I think Israel's culpable in that regard, in that they let their guard down and they kept their eye on. They didn't have their eye on the ball, and we've done the same. So we got to get the intelligence agencies have to use everything, including social media, at our disposal, non-classified sources that, as you know, you aggregate information and it changes the classification, but it's out there. We can track and tag these people. But Neville Chamberlain in this, again, I talked about left and right. Extreme far left and right have isolationists and say, why does this impact us? What is this? Why is this our business? Well, Israel does as much or more for us than we do for them. They've never asked for anything for us, but we're going to sit on the sidelines and or help in a tangential sense, the way we did with the UK in World War II, and we're going to get hit like Pearl Harbor. We're already in this. Iran has already killed our citizens, and not just in Israel, but through Hezbollah back in the 80s with the Beirut barracks, and then in Iraq, the Jaish al-Mahdi, the Army of the 12th Imam, which was funded, trained, and resourced by the Al-Quds forces of Iran. They killed more of our guys in Iraq than Al-Qaeda ever did. All those Katyusha rockets that were coming in at me every other day, and the explosive form penetrators, there's molten copper projectiles that could penetrate an Abrams tank. That was all courtesy of Iran. We're already, everyone says no war with Iran. Well, tell them that. It's like Lord of the Rings, where the king of Rohan says, I won't risk open war, or a track that leads us to open war. And Aragorn says, open war is upon you, whether you risk it or not. It's already here. You turn your back on it and deny it and say, it's not like a soccer game where you can say, I'm not playing today, and walk off the field. You're dead. So stand up. That would be my advice, is we already ought to be unleashing holy hell in the Middle East. And I would, if I was in the military, still in the U.S. military, I'd ask to be involved, as I asked for many years in Iraq and Afghanistan. Although they're not going to send you unless there's a mission for you. Just because you want to go, they're not going to send you over there. And I have no misgivings that I would be knocking down doors, rescuing hostages, or jumping out of perfectly good aircraft. I do what I did in the Army, which is chem biodefense, medical chem biodefense program, as a subject matter expert for that at the strategic level, as I did at the Pentagon, or military working dogs and animal health and human health as someone who's boarded in public health and preventive medicine. So that would be it, kind of in a nutshell. My advice is that we need to be more involved in it and jump in. But given that I'm retired now and have 100% VA disability, they wouldn't take me back in anyway. I would like to help in another capacity, but again, I think that's for later on in the discussion.
Understand.
This needs to end swiftly and decisively. We need to have not only strong sanctions with Iran, but with other countries like Qatar that are harboring Hamas leadership and who would be much more susceptible to the effects of sanctions against them. Forget the $6 billion that Biden sent back to Iran. There's tens of billions that they've made in oil revenue because of lifting of sanctions. And honestly, this goes back to the Obama administration as well, where you had the moral equivalence arguments, where he refused to call out anti-Semitism where it was, where he snubbed Netanyahu at every turn, just like Biden has. And in the last few weeks of the Obama administration, there was a critical vote in the UN condemning Israel, and Obama had one of my other personal favorites, John Kerry, abstain in the vote. And that sends a very clear message to where we stand or where we don't stand, and our moral ambiguity on this issue. Trump was a very outspoken, staunch advocate and ally of Israel, like no other president in her 75-year history of the state of Israel. And the demonization or accusations of him of racism and anti-Semitism, especially from the left and especially from the Jewish left, are so counterproductive and almost a suicide pact in this nostalgic inertia of a party that no longer makes sense. It's no longer a party that represents the safety, security, and future of not only Israel, but the Jewish people in this country, and why so many of my mishpacha, or family, in the broader sense, still cling to that party. And I see it too in our government. It's not just the squad and their overt anti-Semitism and the things that they say and that they're not reined in on or taken to task on. But it's Nancy Pelosi is a very shrewd puppeteer. And if you look at the face of impeachment in this country, it's very dangerous. Who does she choose to speak and spearhead the impeachment agenda? It's Schumer, Schiff, Nadler, and Raskin, all prominent Jewish senators and representatives in our Congress. And she does that intentionally because she wants to draw out the anti-Semitism from idiots on the right who say, oh, well, why are all of these prominent Jews so anti-Trump and so anti-America and pro-BLM, which is now chanting, they chanted F the Jews years ago, and now they're standing with Palestinians. I mean, this is not the history of the collaboration of the Jewish and African American people anyway. It doesn't represent that. But all of this posturing and virtue signaling that they're doing is going to draw out the anti-Semitism from wackos on the right, and thereby detract or throw up a smokescreen for where the real anti-Semitism, you want to talk about, what's the word, established or systemic anti-Semitism is from the left in the Democrat Party. And so she's doing that to kind of disguise it, and it's very dangerous. And I blame those Congress people too, because they are complicit in this, and they know what they're not stupid. They know what she's doing, but they want the power, and they're putting party ideology over their Jewish identity and the survival and future of their own progeny.
Got another question for you, though. As a person of Jewish ancestry, how can your fellow Americans be helpful to this cause?
I have found a lot of friends to be both Jewish and non-Jewish have reached out to me by text, Facebook, phone calls, in person to ask how I'm doing and how this has affected me. Obviously, it's been emotional and devastating to the extent that it brought out emotions that I had after 9/11, but worse. I decided 3 days after 9/11, in part because of my Jewish identity at that time too, to join the Army. And after 22 years of replaying that neural pathway, I'm not going to make a different decision now. So I did send in application for provisional application to the Israeli military if they'll take my 52-year-old broken body in. I think it would be far more likely that it would be in a civilian capacity, assisting them with animal care as a scientist and an scientific advisor, than it would in a uniform capacity, although I can still smoke a lot of 30-year-olds on the run and things like that. But I mean, still in fairly good shape. But if they don't take me for reasons that I can't control, I'm not going to beat myself up, but I have to try. Israel can't fall. And my family, thankfully, has been very supportive of my wanting to do this, and also not in the least bit surprised about it, knowing me. But this is paramount of importance to support Israel and to be involved in whatever way we can. And even while it's here, you've seen it, I've been fighting the trolls online and the misinformation, and I've been catching flack and anti-Semitism here, which means I know I'm over the target. But yeah. I'm not going to let up. There's many ways to be engaged in this fight, whether it's financially, whether to Israel, whether it's supporting friends, whether it's making sure that our press and our Congress are aligned properly on the right side of history with this, squelching the misinformation. But I also sent in info on a civilian capacity through the embassy, so you could reach out to the Israeli embassy and see what assistance they might need in your given area of expertise. And they said as of now they're compiling lists, so remains to be seen whether I go over there. I'm not going to just fly over with no mission and be a burden and problem for somebody, but if I can be of assistance in any way, I'm going to do it.
I got the strangest feeling that you could probably provide a lot of assistance.
Hoping so.
Definitely.
Yeah, like I said, it'll be in the way that I served in the U.S. Army and in a comparable fashion for my background as a veterinarian and scientist. But it also means you have to know how to return fire downrange, and protect yourself and the person next to you. And I would probably lose far less sleep doing that than I'm losing right now, feeling like I'm not contributing in the way that I could.
I totally understand. Dude, it's time for you to tell the people what's really on your mind. Talk to the people. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Berney. I think to put a little pitch in for you, Berney, you've been a great friend and support for me when I ran unsuccessfully, unfortunately, against the machine that we both did, right?
Your time's going to come. Don't worry about it.
Okay, I don't feel like I'm probably going to run again. I would rather help folks like you in your mission, and I know you're running for Congress again, and you're not only a friend for an ally for Israel and the Jewish people, but for what's right in the Constitution. And I really hope that people it's an example for how they should vote and how that vote translates into policy, including international policy, and what happens with Israel, how it translates to domestic policy for our border, and how that impacts the ripple effects of Islamic terror in this country that we don't want to revisit from 22 years ago. So I would start with that. I've had some people feel that I've been aggressive in my responses online and to other people about this, but I'm not pulling punches about how I feel about it. And I don't attack anybody. I counterattack or defend if I feel they've attacked me or more important people I care about, or about this country or the state of Israel. Then I'm going to use my words like I use bullets. And I'm not going to hold back on that. And I don't care what the perception of that is of me. That's this is not a grammar school popularity contest. This is about the future of our country and the world and what's right. So I'm going to continue to stand up and do that. And even if I think some friends have been concerned about my tactics and techniques, when they should be more concerned about our common adversaries and standing with me on it. And maybe they just, maybe they're, as a veterinarian, I'd say maybe their gonads haven't descended from their abdomen yet. But if they're a little shocked by it, maybe they just haven't had the courage to stand up and stand beside me and say the things that I'm saying. I'm not trying to be, I guess, conceited about that. I just think it's the right thing to do. Someone had said to family that my kids are grown now, and the only thing that I owe them, aside from love for the rest of the time that I'm on this planet, is to show them what honor is. And we're all obligated to do that. And just because I'm no longer in the uniform, I took as you know, even when we're retired, that oath to the Constitution and what it stands for remains. And we will stand up at any time for anything that we're called up to do and uphold that oath. Please realize that a lot of what's going on with social media and with the media is meant to be distracting. Many folks say, do your research. Do your research. I don't think these folks have ever done a research project or know what a card catalog is, for crying out loud. They're short attention span theater, 5 to 15 minutes on Google with confirmation bias sources and Dunning-Kruger effect. They've done no degree, no decades of experience in that realm, no TSSCI clearance for however many years you and I held it to know what the heck they're talking about. But yet they find some source and throw it out there and say, oh, look at this. Like, I'm not reading that. I don't have time to read the BS sources. If you want to hear what's really going on, my unabashed heroes in this are folks like Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, and they're not all Jewish. And folks will say these are right-wing pundits. Well, they're the ones who are standing up for Israel. And if it was a left-wing pundit, I'd say the same. I've seen some things that Bill Maher has said too, and I really don't like the guy overall. But when it comes to Islamic terror for the past 2 decades, he's been squarely on the right side of that. And there are examples on the left and right of people who know what they're talking about, and they will put down their partisanship when it comes to an issue like this. That's where we need to be. We need to unite around Israel as our ally. We need to purge this ridiculous. And I'm worried about my son because he's a freshman in college right now, and worry about all my kids, but particularly in the environment he's in, and these. And the spoiled kid. Thankfully, he's not at an Ivy League school. I'd pull him out of there. It's not worth the money and alleged prestige that's waning for the indoctrination and real lack of free thought that they're supposed to represent. But right. If these folks are, especially if they're not citizens, they don't have the right for that free speech. And if they're aiding and abetting terrorist organizations by what they're doing, then they need to be their exit stage far left from this country needs to be expedited.
Man, you don't get me to laughing. Speaking of people who really know what they're talking about, I mean, bottom line is that your background is impeccable, and you've done things for this country that most people will never do. And that's why we asked you to come on here, man. I mean, thanks, not just that you're my friend, you're a knowledgeable subject matter expert. So,
and that frustrates people. That I will tell you, when it comes to people who, whether they don't like Israel, they don't like Trump, they don't like whatever it is, or they talk about environmental issues, things like that. I mean, the most dangerous and annoying and obnoxious thing to them is an educated conservative.
There you go. There you go. No
So
truer
keep
words were
educating.
spoken.
There's many ways to do that. It doesn't have to be, a couple of stints in doctoral programs. You can do it by actually doing research, not finding single point sources that in a search that conforms to what your Google entry and your Google history wants you to believe.
Or you can live it like you have.
And live it. Yeah, live it and actually get a degree in something and take the time and money and effort to invest in something that actually immerses you in it instead of putting you, one onion layer deep, because when they peel that onion layer back one more layer, they're going to cry. They can't take the scent of it.
All right. Well, look, man, I better let you go. You got an appointment coming up, and I don't want to be the cause of you being late.
Oh, your priority, man. Always.
Well, brother, I appreciate
My
it.
appointment's with you. That can wait. But thanks for your time and giving me the audience and the voice for this. You have, if your listenership is anything like you, and I'm sure they rally behind you because of their comparable ideology and viewpoint, then I love them all already. Thanks for listening.
You give me way too much credit. Give my best to your family and your brother John, and we will see each other soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Berney.
All right, brother. Take care now. Well, that's about it for now. This has been the Loyal Opposition Podcast, produced in association with Liberty Arise Media, Fallback Productions, and other podcasters. I ask that you like, share, and subscribe to this podcast and to these channels. Be sure to get your copy of my book, Black Values Matter, available on Amazon or as an ebook on Audible and on Apple Books. And remember, it's okay to disagree, but if we want our country to prosper, we must insist on unity, transparency, and civility from ourselves and our fellow citizens. Thanks for listening to the Loyal Opposition Podcast. See you next week.
Honey. It's one of the greatest gifts to man. With millions of wildflowers in every bottle, the nourishing power of honey is still yet to be fully discovered. Be Nourished Healing Products combines healing ingredients from around the planet to the purest honey from the island of Maui to bring magic to your taste buds. The best honey from the most beautiful place to nourish your body, mind, and soul. From our hearts to yours, be nourished.